Hi, good day. I am Fatima Saladaga, a student of Kapalan College of Agriculture Sciences and Technology, taking Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education, major in Mathematics. For this video, I am going to have a lecture about the special and inclusive education. I am going to explain to you the barriers, classroom, and concept of special and inclusive education. Now, let's get started. What is education? Education is very necessary for each and everyone in order to improve knowledge, way of living, as well as social and economic status throughout the life. It helps a person to get knowledge and improve confidence level all through the life. It plays a great role in our career growth as well as in the personal growth. Education is essential for youth in creating opportunities for themselves, staying away from illegal activities, and providing for their families. Providing youth with a solution to their biggest problem and help them finish their education so they can become true game changers in their communities and in the world. We all believe that all youth should have an education, even youth that are special. Whether it is about respect, a higher position in society, and a professional environment, financial security, family stability, education provides all of this and much more. Like Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So for me, all children deserve this power. Now, let's go to the main content of this lecture, the special and inclusive education. Special education, also called special needs education. The education of children who differ socially, mentally, or physically from the average to such an extent that they require modifications of usual school practices. Special education serves children with emotional, behavioral, or cognitive impairments, or with intellectual, hearing, vision, speech, or learning disabilities. Gifted children with advanced academic abilities, and children with orthopedic or neurological impairments. Also, deafness, blindness, speech disorder, mental disorder, gifted child, childhood disease and disorder, and learning disabilities. It allows the students to enjoy the education and gain confidence due to individual learning. For the personal growth and development of the special children, it is important for all of them to receive proper education. The purpose of this special education is to enable students to grow to their fullest potential by providing a free, appropriate public education designed to fit their unique and special needs. So, why do we need special education? First, to help the exceptional children to learn and acquire necessary skills for their self-help, independent living, and leading future life as properly as possible. Next, to help them to acquire necessary social skills, emotional literacy to live and participate in school, home, and community life as properly as possible. To help them in receiving instructions and learning experiences in tune with their learning abilities and specific individualities. To help them in seeking their integration into the mainstream by providing them the least restrictive environment for their educational placement. To help them in acquiring learning experience and training by the use of materials, methods, techniques, aids, and equipments, assistive devices, and etc. as per tune with the nature of their exceptionalities. And lastly, to help them in getting appropriate educational, personal, and vocational guidance for their adequate adjustments and developments. The concept of special education mainly focuses on the designing of educational structure that has the potential to overpower the disadvantages of any disability, along with helping the children to get quality education. So, it has become very important for the educator of the teacher to follow the classroom rules that could fulfill their requirements. The classroom of special education. First is to meet the requirements of the students. Proper and well-maintained instructions should be structured, which can be faster or slower according to the need of the students. For providing individual attention to each student, the size of the class should keep smaller. This will enable the student to understand the entire information provided to them by their tutors. The educators of the special education should have well-determined education so that they can individually educate each student. Before the proper encoding of the information, repeated trials and opportunities should be given to them. Tutors should use unique aids and tools for teaching students with special needs. Educators should use special and unique ideas for increasing their understanding towards the information given to them. They should adopt the trial and error methodology. Alternative usage of tools can be performed, like if one tool does not work, tutor can use another tool that could easily replace the previous one. Patience and tolerance is meant to be the most important key in the classroom of special education. With regards to the behavior of the students, positive attitude is essential. The cognitive capabilities can be affected by the wrong attitude of the teachers or the tutors. And lastly, establish a positive learning environment where the focus is on both learning and positive will go long way in curbing students' behaviors. If they know as students that you will meet their needs and remain positive, they will be less likely to show you those negative behaviors. Students with disabilities presents with so many unique needs. It becomes necessary to have a whole list of strategies to engage and manage their needs. Now, we have barriers to support these special students to have their special education. First barrier is inadequate funding. This was cited as the prime reason for delayed and diminished special education for services at the elementary and secondary levels. Often, accommodation decisions are made based on budgetary considerations rather than on assessment of the actual needs of the students with disabilities. At the post-secondary level, the funding structure is highly complex, with some programs containing eligibility requirements and restrictions that raise human rights issues. Second, physical and accessibility. Students with disabilities continue to conquer physical barriers to educational services, such as lack of ramps or elevators in multi-level school buildings, heavy doors, inaccessible washrooms, or inaccessible transportations to school and from school. Students at the post-secondary level also experience difficulty in securing accessible students' housing. Third, accommodation process. Accommodation is not always provided in a timely manner, often insufficient and sometimes not provided at all. At the elementary and secondary levels, other difficulties include delays at many strategies of accommodation process, a large backlog in the processing of claims for special education funding, long waiting list for professional assessment, and delays in the provision of special education programs and the services. At the post-secondary level, information about services and supports is not always accessible. There are delays in accessing accommodation, and the right of students to confidentiality is not always respected. Fourth, lack of individualization. At the elementary and secondary levels, some education providers are relying on blanket approaches to accommodation, rather than accessing each student on an individual basis. Some funding schemes rely on the preset categories and labels, and emphasize student weakness rather than strength. Suspicion and expulsion policies are at the times rigidly applied and do not take into account a student's individual circumstances. At all levels of education, there needs to be a greater recognition of the context in which discrimination occurs. Not all students will experience discrimination in the same way. For example, some students with disabilities are also members of other historically disadvantaged groups, and thus may experience discrimination on more than one ground. Fifth, effective dispute resolution mechanism. The dispute resolution mechanisms that exist to deal with accommodation issues are often ineffective. And disputes about accommodation are often causing students to lose time in school and are increasingly ending up at the Ontario Human Rights Commission as complaints. At the elementary and secondary levels, the appeal process for decisions regarding identifications and placement of exceptional students is cumbersome, time-consuming, and overly litigious, and does not allow for appeals regarding programs and services. At the post-secondary level, processes for resolving disputes are inconsistent, time-consuming, and often place the proof of students themselves to show that an accommodation would not cause undue hardship. Negative attitudes and stereotypes. Lastly, students with disabilities continue to face negative attitudes and stereotypes in the education system. Lack of knowledge about and sensitivity to disability issues on the part of some educators, staff, and students can make it difficult for them with disabilities to access educational services equally. Let's move on to inclusive education. What is inclusive education? The most effective way to give all children a fair chance to go to school, learn, and develop the skills they need to thrive. Inclusive education means all children in the same classrooms, in the same school. It means real learning opportunities for groups who have traditionally been included, not only children with disabilities, but speakers of minority languages too. Inclusive system value the unique contributions students of all backgrounds bring to the classroom, and allow diverse groups to grow side by side to the benefit of all. Inclusive education is when all students, regardless of any challenges they may have, are placed in the age-appropriate general education classes that are in their own neighborhood schools to receive high-quality instruction, interventions, and supports that enable them to meet access and the core curriculum. To achieve proper education to students who are in inclusive education, these are the objectives. All children can learn and reach their full potential given opportunity, effective teaching, and appropriate resources. Programs will be offered to best meet the individual needs of each child and student within the school community. A student's program must address the intellectual, learning, communication, social, emotional, and physical aspects of a children's development. Parents play a key role in the education of their child, in that they are the most complete information source and have the greatest investment in their child's future. All students will have equitable opportunity to be included in the typical learning environment. All students shall be given the opportunity to participate in all aspects of school life, subject to limitations based on reasonableness in each circumstances. Whether possible, the student should be a partner in her education program or in his education program. Student program needs are best met by a team approach. For children and students to receive the services they need, school personnel will work together with the service providers in the community. There must be a balance between individual and group rights within the classroom setting. In every case, the best educational interests of students in the paramount consideration for decision-making and programming. Lastly, awareness and support by the school community is essential to successful inclusion. Diversity must be valued in order for inclusion to be successful. The classroom of inclusive education. Building a classroom community where all students feel a sense of belonging is an area most educators spend weeks of school, especially the first few weeks of school, focused on. How can we ensure inclusivity is at the forefront of our daily instruction? Number 1, get to know your students and let them get to know you. Establishing a bond with your students take time. Creating opportunities for students to share their interests, struggles, and aspirations with you and sharing yours with them builds a connection that can continue to grow. Some teachers like to use surveys or journals to find out more about their students. Think about what has worked for you in the past and what hasn't. What is something you can do consistently to connect with each student? Number 2, create a safe space for students to share. Students also need explicit time to establish connections with their peers. Regularly split students into new small groups and use the I see, I think, I wonder. That is the strategy to digest something they have learned about or a current event that may be on their minds. By modeling how this should work and creating group norms, students can have fruitful conversations that build empathy and share different opinions in a respectful way. Reinforcing social emotional skills like empathy and compassion in your classroom fosters positivity interactions between your students. Number 3, deliver instruction in a variety of ways. There is increasing evidence that shows the gamified lessons positively influence students' engagement. To appeal to different learning styles, reimagine existing lessons, especially those that feel lectures heavy, with fresh videos, books, and gamified digital activities. A study conducted by a Canadian Journal of Action Research comparing student engagement with gamified lessons versus alternative traditional lessons found that students should higher class average scores for both focus and attentiveness during digital game-based learning 6 out of 8 times. Number 4, choose relevant literature. Part of cultural responsive teaching includes providing students with literary works that highlight the human experience, including indigenous, African American, and refugee stories, as well as stories that include characters with a physical or learning disability. Dig into these 11 books to add your lessons for books list across grade levels for your classroom library. Number 5, invite guest speakers to share their stories. According to an article published on Economics of Education Review, when students can identify with a teacher or guest speakers, racial or ethnic background, they are more likely to perform higher and more engaged as they see a potential role model or mentor in that person. By inviting a guest speaker, you are providing your students access on authentic learning experience they may never otherwise have. The barriers of inclusive education. These obstacles in inclusive education consist of a short list of factors that can affect students with disabilities in a general education classroom. Only a profound understanding of these factors and relevant issues for hinder inclusion and the elimination of them will make true inclusion a reality for all children to learn together. First barrier is the attitudinal barriers. Some of the greatest barriers related to inclusion in education are negative attitudes. Many people are not prepared to interact with people with disabilities. They think that persons with disabilities lacked the skills needed to live in a community or to be educated with non-disabled children. Second barrier is physical barriers. The lack of wheelchair ramps in school buildings, malls, parks, playgrounds, washrooms, and public transportations is a main difficulty identified by several students with disabilities when going to school and public places. Most school structures does not respond to this requirement. Number 3, inappropriate curriculum. The curriculum is one of the chief impediments to the process of inclusive education. It happens because it does not meet the needs of a broad range of diverse learners. In many contexts, it is the centralized in design and rigid in approach which causes little flexibility for modification based on the local setting or for teachers to try out new approaches. Fourth, untrained teachers. The educators are the most significant human resources of advancing inclusive education. Their proficiency and outlook have a dramatic impact on the lives of students who are different and who have learning challenges. Unfortunately, the teacher's competency and attitude can be the most important constraints for inclusive education. Fifth, inadequate funding. Insufficient funding is a chief threat for the implementation of inclusion. It is reflected in the scarcity of resources like insufficient classrooms, inadequate facilities, lack of teachers, and unqualified staff, scarce learning materials, and absence of support. Significantly insufficient funding can hamper ongoing professional development that helps keep both specialists and classroom teachers updated on the best practices of inclusion. Sixth, poor organization of the education system. Responsibility for decision trends to be located at the highest level, and the focus of management remains oriented towards employees, complying with rules rather than ensuring quality service delivery. Last, policies as barriers. Policy making who have unsound grasp or opposing views on inclusive education are obstacles on the implementation of inclusive policies. That is the social and inclusive education. I hope you understand and learn from my lecture, and thank you for watching this video.